Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Attorney General Bill Barr with Mark Levin on his Fox show on Sunday night. Good chat that they had.
Yeah, and we couldn't get to it yesterday because of the news of the day.
Barr speaking about how politics has changed from his first spin as Attorney General to the current one, so over the last 30 years. And what exactly the Democrat Socialist Party is in 2020.
You know, I have the perspective of having been Attorney General 30 years ago and now, and I thought things were partisan and tough 30 years ago. Nothing compared to today. Things have fundamentally changed. And I think what has happened, and I've been thinking about this because in the old days, you could have friends across the aisle. Politics was part of your life, but it wasn't all-consuming. It wasn't everything. You could, have communications and so forth with others. But it's now become all-consuming for many people. And I think what's happened is that the left wing has really withdrawn and pulled away from the umbrella of classical liberal values that have undergirded our society since our founding. And, within the family, we've had two ways of resolving disputes. One is discussion, the dialectic, the marketplace of ideas, trying to arrive at the truth. We had an idea that there was some truth to arrive at. And then if we couldn't reach agreement, a vote. And that's how we operated. Nowadays, you have, I think the left has essentially withdrawn from this model and really represents a Rousseauian revolutionary party that believes in tearing down the system. That what's wrong about America today all has to do with the institutions we have, and we have to tear them down. And they're interested in complete political victory. They're not interested in compromise. They're not interested in dialectic exchange of views. They're interested in total victory, and it's a secular religion. It's a substitute for religion. They view their political opponents and as evil, that because we stand in the way of their progressive utopia that they're trying to reach, and that's what gives the intensity to the partisan feeling.
And Chicagoans are grappling with the Rousseauians they elected. It's just difficult to find that ideal state of nature pocket that Rousseau talked about. So popular with the Jacobins of his time he was. What's a neo-Jacobin in Chicago to do? Since Rousseau was invoked, I figured we better talk to a philosophy professor. And so we're pleased to be joined again by Jason Hill, professor of philosophy at DePaul University, author of the book We Have Overcome. Jason, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Yeah, so I think Bill Barr is getting to something important, and the invocation of Rousseau and the hearkening back to the French Revolution was clearly purposeful. But it's wrestling those buttoned-down Rousseauians in public office versus those more freewheeling Rousseauians on the streets. Difficult for one to reconcile with the other. They got a problem.
I think Barr is being way too kind. Rousseau, at the time of the writing of the social contract, was writing for a very homogeneous Swiss canton. And it presupposed an agreement on a set of values, on a set of mores and norms. I think what we're seeing today is nothing like a Rousseauian social contract. What we're seeing is systemic nihilism. We're not seeing the far left going after any kind of a progressive utopia. We're seeing them going after the destruction of values for the sake of values. We're seeing them going after anarchy, pursuing anarchy and nihilism. So I think Attorney General Barr is being way too charitable, shall I say, to the vandalists and the looters and the rioters and the nihilists that we see in the streets today.
Well, what do you think about the rioters and the looters that's taking place in Chicago that took place May 30th and then again on Sunday night into Monday?
Well, I think that they are just the unruly stepchildren of their college professors, and they're the symptoms of the dominant trends philosophic trends of this culture, which preaches anti-reason, anti-logic, that your feelings and your sense of being offended are the only criteria for adjudicating disputes, that access and showcasing of your feelings are sufficient grounds for destroying property, for spitting in the face of other people, the faces of other people's values. I don't think it's just mere lawlessness as a result of the absence of policing, although I think that plays, and I want to talk about that a little bit, I think that plays a huge role. I think it's the manifestation of the fact that the West has capitulated and America has capitulated and become apologists for its Enlightenment values, for its Western civilizational values, and there has been a vacuum for a long, long time. And in that vacuum have arisen these nefarious, nihilist, anarchist movements, symptoms of which we're seeing in the classrooms and in the streets today.
And so, what the nihilists are using today versus, the Marxists of a bygone era, rather than class from the bygone era, it's identitarianism. It's mainly race. It's not exclusively race, but certainly since George Floyd, it's been mainly about race. And you just say with the police at the top of the hit list because of the historic issues between police and and Black Americans. Legitimate issues in the past, much less legitimate today in the present in terms of the argument that police are systemically racist. But that said,
Right.
that said, so it seems to me that the cultural Marxists of today, you're arguing, are not really even Marxists at all. They're nihilists who've latched on to race as the way to foment the most destruction, the way to exacerbate and drive the most anarchy in the quickest way possible.
That's right. And they want to smash the system, destroy the system. I'm not sure they have any idea of what to replace it with. I'm not sure they themselves know what to replace it with. But if you listen to the mantra, if you listen to, like, for example, read the charter of Black Lives Matter and the Constitution, if you want to call it that, it's just a sort of crude creed that calls for the destruction of all banks, the breaking up of U.S. corporations, the destruction of capitalism, with nothing to replace it, really. It's a destruction for the sake. It's like obstreperous children on a beach that just kick down sandcastles for the sake of kicking down and destroying sandcastles with no incentive to rebuild what other children have built. But I want to say something, Dan and Amy. I want to say that in the name of political correctness, we saw last night the mayhem that happened on the Gold Coast in Chicago, right, where a lot of stores and storefront properties were destroyed. And in the name of political correctness, the police force, law enforcement has refused to exercise the full force, the full legal onslaught of its force against citizens because, paradoxically, it's afraid of being accused of brutality. So now we have crippled, we have paralyzed, we have compromised law enforcement to lawfully exercise what it needs to do in the name of justice by preventing these feral thugs, these primordial barbaric nihilists from wreaking havoc on the wonderful city of Chicago. These are now hijacked and refuse to exercise the full weight of law enforcement out of political correctness.
But let me suggest something and get your reaction to it. That on the one hand, you have the Clockwork Orange brigades, okay, the nihilists, the anarchists. On the other hand, you have the coordinators, those who had the U-Haul trucks at the ready, those who had rocks and other projectiles to throw at police, both last night in Chicago and in rioting and lawlessness we've seen in other major cities, Portland, Seattle, and other places. You've got the organizers, the founders of Black Lives Matters, the Alicia Garzas and the Patrisse Cullors, and then you've got, the random dope who throws on a T-shirt and thinks he's doing something important. It seems to me that you do have ideological neo-Marxists, cultural Marxists, and then you've got an assortment of go along, get alongers, ill-informed as social justice warriors, and then these nihilists that you're talking about. But you really do have an ideological movement afoot, and it's been provided safe haven in the Democrat Socialist Party.
Right. I think that's right. And I think the people who come with the U-Haul trucks and the looters and rioters, those are the kind of, the let's call them the ideological social ballasts. These are people who are like vultures. They're parasites who sit around waiting for any kind of opportunity to unleash their either homicidal or their criminal impulses. And without the sort of, Antifa and the Black Lives Matter movement and the postmodern nihilists and the real ideological organizers, these people would be bereft of venue, short of just like being ordinary everyday criminals. They'd be bereft of a legitimate venue to unleash their criminal impulses. So you always have those sorts of people who will just take advantage of any kind of opportunity to unleash their criminality. And I think those are what I call the stragglers, the people who, that's like break the shop windows for the sake of breaking shop windows and grabbing a TV screen.
So Bob Woodson, our mutual friend, wrote recently in the Washington Examiner this statement. Today, the challenges facing Black America are worse than the conditions of slavery. Wow. Worse than the conditions of slavery. Slavery imposed an external boundary. Today, blacks are being held back by the internal bondage of the belief that their destiny lies outside of their control and that until and unless white America grants what is demanded, life will never improve. So react to Bob's diagnosis of the problem and the extent of the problem with Black Americans generally in America. And also whether or not America's future will run through the decision Black America makes as to whether or not they want to go the direction Bob Woodson and Shelby Steele and people like you are advocating, or whether they want to go the identitarian way. That will ultimately determine what America looks like.
Right. Well, I'm not a historical determinist, so I won't, people have a choice to think or not to think. I don't agree with Bob's assessment that blacks are worse off than in slavery. There was nothing more nefarious and evil and restrictive than chattel slavery. And there is no monolithicity among blacks today, and we do have a number of Black Americans who are exercising their freedom and exercising their creative agency. I use myself as evidence of one such person, and I'm not a minority in this case. There are a number of people, Black Americans, who are exercising their creative agency and their freedom in fantastic and wonderful ways. I think what is going to happen is that the culture wars are going to be so divisive that Black Americans are going to have to make a decisive choice to break with movements like Black Lives Matter, who do not speak in their interests or for their interests or in their names, and realize that in the long run, such movements like the postmodern left, like the far left, and the not so far left, really, and Black Lives Matter, are really meant to use them as pawns and hijack their identity for really, truly nefarious purposes that are not in their economic, their existential, and their moral well-being. But I can't prognosticate. I mean, that's a choice that people have to make for themselves. But I respect Bob's position, but I think that's a little hyperbolic.
Well,
I wouldn't say that.
Okay, but to the point that decision, I mean, you're essentially agreeing that we're at that Black America's at this crossroads, and they have to there's got to be a decision made. And I know it's not monolithic, but individual decisions. But the idea is that where the weight of the Black community goes, in which direction, the identitarian direction or the self-empowerment, entrepreneurial, free-thinking direction, that will determine the fate of America, the fate of this experiment in democracy. Is that hyperbolic?
No, that's not hyperbolic. And to the extent that we whether it's a Democratic government or a Republican government, to the extent that we cut these welfare programs and we sort of break the economic dependence of blacks on the state and stop treating blacks like infantilized morons and treat them as full-fledged citizens and full-fledged adults and force them to accept responsibility for their lives and accept the procreative choices that they make for themselves. They may, majority of blacks may just have to be 74% of children in the African American community are born out of wedlock, and about 60% of those are born into poverty. So long as the fiscal choice, the policies that are made do not, in some sense, cater to dependency, then blacks may have no choice but to sort of disambiguate themselves from identity politics and realign themselves to the policies to a philosophy, shall I say, of self-reliance. But so long as we have parties, both the left and the right, in some sense, that cater to blacks as children and treat them as wards of the state, I see no incentive for black Americans, except, some who are sort of self-regarding, to sort of decentivize themselves from the dependency on the state, or to remove themselves from dependency on the state, so long as there exist these sorts of policies. So in that sense, Bob is probably right. But to sort of say that it's the same, it's worse than slavery, I think that's a little bit too extreme.
He is Jason Hill. He's a professor of philosophy at DePaul University, author of We Have Overcome, an Immigrant's Love Letter to America. Jason Hill, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook.